Good morning, afternoon, evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm George Moss, host of the program here on allpointstv.com. Program called What's Going On, and we come on at 2 o'clock every Monday. And we have decided to shorten the format just a little bit so that you won't have to spend all of your time watching what I'm doing here. We want to try to do a quick run, a drive-by, and then you can tune it in at your leisure. We're going to cut the program down just a little bit from 1 hour, which has been ever since we started the program, and we're going to cut it down to 30 minutes, try to be more precise, and hit it and then quit it. Glad you're here this afternoon as always. Hope you'll stay tuned to all the programs here at allpointstv.com. We'll be followed today by the program that comes on every second and fourth Mondays, Satura's Black History Corner, and that program comes on around 3:30 and it's still around about 30 minutes. So they're already in a 30-minute format. So in just 1 hour of your time, you'll be able to get two programs, two for the price of one. And we're trying to do that so that we don't have to impose on your time, but we do try to make sure we don't waste your time by having something that we try to present that is of quality, and we know that you want the best we can offer, and we're trying to give you our best. Today I want to, again, tell you to read my post on Facebook. I try to interface what we do here at the studio and try to make sure that we are in alliance with what we're doing on Facebook, talking to large audiences, hopefully, in the future as well as the present, trying to grow the numbers. And we'll do whatever we think we have to do and whatever you suggest we can do that will, in fact, allow us to reach a larger part of the population, because we're trying to talk to America. And we need to have a conversation in this country at this point, because we got to come together very quickly, and certainly come together, as I see it, by the 8th of November, because I think this is it. The nation is at the crossroads, and every nation comes to the point of being at the crossroads, and they've got to determine, being at the fork in the road, so to speak, which direction they're going to go in, and where do we go from here? And that's the question, the critical question of the hour. And we got a choice to make. I want to say to you today that we have got to understand clearly what's going on in this country. There are some very malevolent influences in back of what is taking place right now. And I'm reading as they come out, and so many of them come out, you can't keep up with all of them, but you can read some of the ones that are key. And I'm talking here about the WikiLeaks that have been coming out regularly now that we're getting close to the election on November the 8th. And you've got to get out and vote in this election. There cannot be anyone staying at home at this critical juncture in our history. But I'm reading these WikiLeaks, and they're very informative about what is being said in terms of that private view. You remember Mrs. Clinton talking about she had a public view and a private view? You can pretty much dismiss what's going on in the public, because these persons are well masked and they're very clever. So what they're saying in public, that's like with a grain of salt pretty much. And you have to go back behind the scenes and see what are they saying when they're not talking to the public, and when we're not really prescient to what their conversations are about. And it's what they're saying in private, and their private voice doesn't match what they're saying in the public or domain. And I've just been really, I haven't been really surprised by anything, but I've been amazed at how treacherous and how deceitful these persons are. I mean, I know that they're masked, and I probably knew it better than most, because they are masked in ways that I've been talking about for years that are just now beginning to come out. I was saying this back in 1978. Quite frankly, after I had read H.R. Haldeman's book called The Ends of Power. And what that book showed, I guess it put a piece of the puzzle into place I wasn't really cognizant on, at least on the conscious level. I knew something was going on in the background, but I couldn't put my finger on exactly what it was. But what that book showed me in terms of The Ends of Power written by Haldeman was that there was a fourth estate. I mean, we know about the legislative branch of government. We know about the executive in Article 2 and the third article, which sets up the judicial branch of government. What I wasn't paying attention to was this other non-entity that was not defined as being a point of power that needed to be under control, which was the media. I mean, that wasn't seen at the time of the founders, that was another voice out there that needed to also be part of what would be a check and balance system. They understood you need to check the political figures. I mean, people you vote people into power, and they're in the three branches of government, and they need to have certain checks and balances on them going out of control. And so they set up a very magnificent way of handling that, providing that the things written on parchment, and that's all it is, words on parchment, where politicians eventually begin to recognize it as such, and they break from underneath it. But the words on the parchment are brilliant. And it certainly was a brilliant design in terms of making sure that the aggregation of power was not in one of the corridors, but in all different corridors, separated from each other, co-equal branches, each jealous of his own privilege, and not willing to, in fact, surrender those privileges to the other two. That was the idea behind it. But what was not seen was this fourth estate that has come out of the woodwork, and they've joined on to the three branches. Quite frankly, we have a fourth branch, but this branch is not under the check and balance system. It's not in the separation of powers, and it stands as a behemoth over all three in cooperation with them, and actually is a very strong part of how these other three have gotten out of control, and they don't report the facts, so that the accountability that they were supposed to bring to the American people, so we could see what was going on behind the closed doors, with them being the eyes and ears of the American people. It was seen as a role where the press would, in fact, be the mediators between the government entities and the American people, and they were standing the gap between the two, and we could hold the officials accountable as the fourth estate. We never intended for the fourth estate to be the to be the media, which is the only protected class, by the way, in the Constitution. It's a protected class in the sense, in the First Amendment, you have the freedom of the press. So the idea was they use that freedom, it would not be on the auspices of control of the government in terms of you can't say this to the people because we don't you telling them what we're doing. They were protected from having that voice arrested by giving the freedom to the press to do its job, which its job was to inform the American people. It never was seen that they would in fact be in cooperation with the political class, with the political interests. And that's what we're dealing with right now. But what WikiLeaks has pointed out is that behind those closed doors that Hillary Clinton was talking about, when she was saying that there's one thing you say to the public and another thing you say behind the scenes, what she was actually showing is that masking that we now can see very clearly. They're wearing masks. And I have to tell you something here. I think that's what a lot of people are missing when they start talking about the invisible government. That's not what's going on, quite frankly. I know a lot of people think it is. There's somebody hovering around above these people that you are electing, and they're hovering around and they're dictating the terms. That's not what's going on, although that's what I thought was going on. And I think that's what Griffin makes a mistake in his book called The Creatures of Jekyll Island, a brilliant book. I've gone through it 2 times, and I have a lot of respect for Griffin. Don't get me wrong about that. I have a lot of respect for this person who did impeccable research in that book. That book is impeccably researched. But Griffin is like a lot of people. You know, a lot of us have got to get past our training. You know, it's hard for us to come to a conclusion that the people that we elect into power can be this devious. And I really, in traveling, and that's what I was writing about today, in traveling, was able to get outside of the country for a moment and then began to look at, and when I travel, I try to look at what is going on in those countries politically. And as you travel, and I'm talking about in Europe, where I was last summer, and I've been in the third world from 2006 up until this past summer, and I always go there looking for answers. Why is this going on here? Why are these countries not prospering? Why is America not prospering right now? Why is America now on its knees? And why has America been reduced and has been reduced now to a third world status? And America is a third world country, by the way. And it's a status that has been hidden by the same forces that hide themselves in other arenas as well, because they're well hidden. But in terms of this idea, there's something above them, and they're dictating these terms and so on and so forth, but your officials otherwise are fine, and they're not really corrupt, and they're not devious and talking out of both sides of their mouth. They have a public persona and a persona behind closed doors. That's not what's going on. Although I was, in fact, thinking along those same lines, because it couldn't be this bad. But Griffin, I have to tell you something about your book. It's a brilliant book. And I admire people that are of that mindset, trying to hold the government accountable to explain how we got to where we are right now. Well, Griffin starting his book in 1910 at the Jekyll Island meeting off the coast of Georgia, where something like 7 people that were sitting at a table trying to figure out how they're going to fix a problem that occurred in 1907 when they had a downturn in the economy, and how to prevent that from taking place in the future. And some of that was in terms of interest trying to protect itself, and that's understandable, but part of it also is what do you have to do in order to bring about serving self-interest? Because no matter what the goodwill is in trying to prevent that from occurring, there's interest coming behind it that will see other exploitative possibilities in what might not have been such a devious plan to start out with. But you see other people are also going to look at this situation and make out of it what they can make out of it as well. So it's a tumbling effect, isn't it, in terms of how that would play out over time. But Griffin saw it through a different lens. I definitely understand where he was coming from in his writing, and I compliment him on his insights. But there's some parts of his insight that are not correct also. And I was there, so I understand that insight very well, but I'm not there anymore. It's that two-tiered voice that Hillary Clinton was talking about in those WikiLeaks tapes, in those emails, in those releases that have shown that there's a public persona and there's also a private persona. And what persons have taken is that they have taken the public persona and they just cannot believe the public persona would preclude some other things going on out of the earshot of the American people. They could be that devious to be a Dr. Jekyll in public and a Mr. Hyde in private. It also goes for Miss Jekyll and Miss Hyde, and they're meeting at Jekyll Island because that's who they are. Public and private. And they're meeting in private, and they went there in disguise, by the way. You know, beards, the whole thing, so as not to be seen. But people got a hold to, why are all these persons in this car with the shades down, traveling from different parts of the country, having met there in secret? We didn't even talk to each other while getting on the train, but they went into the same boxcar, and that's what began to raise a question. Why are these persons? Who are those persons wearing those disguises? And word got out that they're meeting. Now, it's interesting when you go and look at who was at that meeting. Because, yeah, there were the money interests that were there. The representatives of this brilliant banker, J.P. Morgan, Piermont Morgan, that was he wasn't there, but the representative of that company was there. But there's another person there outside of those 6 or 7 person was the one that was really instrumental, and I think that his role has been downsized, because if he's not there, I'm talking about Nelson Aldrich, if he's not there, none of the other stuff will work. And that's what I think that Griffin doesn't give enough attention to, Aldrich. Senator Nelson Aldrich at that table, because if they're planning this from the outside and there's no inside of the carrot inside of the government structure, it doesn't work. Because as powerful as they may well be, as the money changes, they don't control the ultimate power. I'm just telling you that for a fact. You have to be, this can only go on, and you can only get away with it unless the money interest inside of the machinery of the government operates that way. And it took me a long time to understand that. I mean, I thought, quite frankly, I'll be going down to Birmingham, Michigan, on the 53rd anniversary of the Kennedy assassination. They're doing a workshop down there, and I'll be going to participate in that workshop. And it took me a long time. In looking at this issue of the assassination of Kennedy, I just could not believe what the evidence was leading me to conclude. I thought it was simply just I knew the mafia was involved in it, but I just could not conclude that there would be higher-ups in the government that would take out a president of the United States. And lo and behold, as I began to do the research and continue the research, I began to see the connection between the two, because there were some things the mafia could do, and there were some things the mafia could not do. And what they could not do, after a crime had been committed, they could not cover this crime up as they did. And what I'll be saying down there at this conference is that it was well organized, and organized beyond the actual assassination, because they had all the particulars lined up, including blaming Oswald, which was a predetermined outcome of that shooting.
I don't know. See, one question remains for me. Okay, all the conspiracy, I don't know who did it, but I'd like to know this. Oswald renounced his U.S. citizenship.
Yes, he did.
He came back with a Russian bride, a very attractive woman, by the way.
Mm-hmm, sure.
She had to be some kind of, intelligence officer or something like that, in my opinion, okay?
Okay.
Why is he Oswald allowed back in the country? You and I would reject and renounce our U.S. citizenship. They might be trying to be compassionate if we come in to visit a family member and stuff. I'd just like to know why he was allowed back in the country. Now, was it because they didn't want to make a mountain out of a molehill?
No.
Or what was it? Why was he allowed back in the country in the first place?
Oswald was working for the CIA.
That has to, because
they are long, John. They are long range in their planning.
Because I've heard so many stories. I heard the mafia did it.
He's working for CIA.
Because I heard the mafia was behind it. I know who
was behind it. I have the names.
And see, the mafia had did a significant amount of stuff in Sicily back during the Second World War and helped in the United States. And a lot of times they got carte blanche. They turned a blind eye, the U.S. officials, towards the activities of the mob.
Yeah.
But
Oswald
I don't know who
was
did it.
blamed. Oswald was framed. And all of this laying a trail, this very open trail. He didn't know why he was being sent to different places and why there were certain things that were going on once he arrived there. But this was all arranged to create a paper trail. Even the Russian connection was part of it. And the setting off for the rifle under the name of Hadak.
See, I believe the government does send agents, because after the First World War, the Weimar Republic, Hitler was actually working to go to different agencies and different groups and stuff like that and attend their meetings to see what they're like for the very government that replaced the first government after the end of the First World War. And he became the member of the Nazi Party. And ultimately, we saw what happened. But he was a spy. Initially, he was a spy or an agent for the government. So why it's not so preposterous.
It's not preposterous. And today, to just make a more present observation, is that these people in this government of the United States also are the ones that created ISIS. You think ISIS is out there by themselves, that are able to get all the armaments they got, and they're in 32 countries and they can't stop these persons? ISIS is a creation of the American government. And also the Arab Spring was created by the American government. They are the ones who toppled these administrations that had that umbrella of control over these outrageous, these barbaric, these savage organizations that are out here murdering people and attacking Christians. But they're attacking Christians here.
Well, like that one time when they burned the guy in a cage, burned him to death. He was a Muslim himself. Okay, and so even with their faction, I don't see them being that brutal to each other. Normally. I don't see them that. I've seen them kill each other. We've seen that Christians do that too, Protestant Catholics, for example. But the brutality that was, that had to be almost somebody stirred up the pot even further.
Yes.
Yeah.
They are just as brutal in this country in terms of the fact. You see, if you have a Frankenstein monster, you may well be trained to fear the monster, and that is fear that is certainly understandable, and there is a fear one should have of the monster. But you have to understand something here, that if the monster is bad, and certainly the monster is bad, but you have to understand that if the monster is bad, then the one that produced the monster is worse than he is. The monster maker. The masking is not in the monster. He lets you see he's a monster. He's out there, John was just saying, drowning people, putting them in cages and setting them on fire and things like that. These people are vicious. But you see, the ones that's in the suits don't seem to be that, but they produced it. So that's bad, right? And that's out in the public domain. But what about that which is not in the public domain, but is in fact hidden? They're worse than the monster they produce. And that's what you have to understand about what's going on with this two-tiered voice. We cannot recognize that they are these people because we elect them and they speak these words in public and we don't see who they are. But the WikiLeaks have come out now, and those of you who are getting on board with this information can now begin to see what I've seen since 1978. Because that book and some others since that time, and also I've been studying this assassination thing with John F. Kennedy since about 1966 or so. I was in college, by the way. I never forget it. I heard about it about 2 o'clock. I was going to an English class. I'll give you a date of how old I am now. I was a sophomore in college at that time, and I remember going to my English class, and I just was surprised seeing in that classroom that the class was not suspended, but I took it to be a certain amount of hostility that was there toward the president. The class was not suspended. I'm sitting there in the classroom, and at that time, that's when the students didn't have the same voice they have now. And I'm sitting in that classroom thinking that the class should have been suspended, but it wasn't. And it seemed like the teacher was kind of angry up there and felt a certain amount of empowerment. But I can remember what I was doing at that time. But I thought all the facts were in, and I did think it was kind of strange that the President Kennedy is killed on the 22nd of November, and two days later, the one who was alleged to have murdered the president was himself murdered 2 days later by Jack Ruby. Later on, found out his name was Jack Rubenstein. That should have been known. And it just seemed strange that these killings were going on. And then there were these killings that took place in 1968, in which King was killed. There was a lot of death that was taking place prior to that. There was Medgar Evers in Mississippi. There was Malcolm X in Harlem. There was Dr. King in Memphis, and there was Bobby Kennedy in California. And when I saw these things taking place, it began to raise a lot of questions. I really had to start doing more than the work in front of me. I would go and do my homework. So in doing my homework, I just found there was another voice going on. It's not just Hillary Clinton, but there's a lot of other voices going on. And there's a voice in public and one in the background. And it was that background voice, by the way, that I had to start paying attention to, because I was too much looking to the front and taking that as prescient to the moment, and I did not understand until I began to look at this thing more carefully. There were some things that were going on that were antecedent in the background that preceded what was taking place in the public. And that's when I began to understand that there was another thing that was going on here. Many people have gone off into left field like Griffin did. Not in left field, but kind of like in center field. and was beginning to ascribe what was taking place to another, entity that does not exist. And if it did exist, it could not have the power to command those who control the military and the other apparatus. And believe me, they're not going to let another entity come above them with all the power they have, which includes military power, and take over the control of $3.27 trillion, which is the latest statistic on how much money is in fact stolen by these people, stolen and called taxes. That kind of theft. So that two voice that you're looking at is in fact one in front and one in back. So what is going on right now? What's going on right now, in a nutshell, is that they are trying to convince, according to WikiLeaks release, one of the release showing that they're trying to convince the American people that Hillary Clinton is killing this guy at the polls. That is not what's going on. You can finesse the numbers because we don't deal with the numbers, right? Because they deal with the numbers. But that does not mean that you have to suspend all of your other faculties in terms of what you see away from the numbers that would indicate whether the numbers are true or not. And that is, look at the rallies. Look at how many show up here and how many show up there. And what you have in terms of the one showing up over at Donald Trump's rallies is that 500,000 people since the conventions have shown up at Donald Trump's rallies. I'm sorry. Those numbers cannot be ascribed to polling 1,000 plus people. 500,000 is a polling also, but it's a polling with your eyes and with your numbers and not their numbers. And that's what the WikiLeaks show. It shows there was a two-tiered approach going on. One of them was, in fact, to tell the American people that this is a done deal. And that would, in fact, suppress the vote. And number two, it would set the tone for, in fact, taking the election later on and having ascribed that the numbers already have shown the ultimate outcome. No one is surprised when an outcome occurs, but the outcome is predetermined. But we've got to stop the predetermination. That's why we have to get in front of it to let the people know, the powers know that we're looking. And guess what else is taking place, which shows you that this is a preordained conclusion by the persons behind the scenes. And that is George Soros, who is in fact, what is George Soros doing, in fact? Controlling the machines in 16 states. I'll be writing on this tomorrow in part 2. George Soros is one of the most disruptive figures in this country. And we've seen the corruption already with James Comey, who was called to do his job as the director of FBI and failed to do his job, but yet put the held the general to account in one violation of the rule of law in terms of not giving out or making public national security secrets. But what about the 32,000 emails that were erased by Hillary Rodham Clinton that was all forgiven? So James Comey can't be trusted. But in this, and if he could be trusted, George Soros would not be allowed to get anywhere close to those machines. Yet the voting machines in 16 states, including the state of Michigan where we are, those machines are in the care indirectly of George Soros. I've gone behind the scenes and checked it for myself. I'll be calling attention to this in the state of Michigan, and we'll be raising this issue. But that shows you how the fix is in. This system is rigged. And the riggers are not the ones that's somewhere away from the power centers. They're the ones that you're looking at every day, up to the highest levels of government in this country. They're all corrupt. They're corrupt. The system is rigged. And Larry Klayman raised a question in his piece. I was reading his piece, the one that set up Judicial Watch, and another one of his organizations he set up. He said in his piece last week, he said that when Obama was talking about that Donald Trump raising the question of being rigged is hurting our democracy, he raised the question, what democracy? There's no democracy in this country. What we have in America is that we have a dictatorship, and it's disguised to have a democratic mask. There's a dictatorship in America. And we're fighting to get through the maze to get to the other side of it because we have a chance today to do something about it. Okay, we got to get out of here. But I want you to read my post because I'm trying to speak to the public, as a lot of people are doing. They're doing a lot of work out here. We're connected. We're connected to a lot of different units. You'd be surprised how many. And there's a lot of communication going on behind the scenes because people know what's going on. And we'll be doing a lot of things between now and November the 8th to shake their tree. Because if we get in front of it, they can only do what they intend to do in secrecy, in darkness. They can't operate in the light. We're going to drag them out into the public domain and make them come out in public and reveal themselves. Otherwise, they can't get away with it. Okay, that's what we're doing. Read the post. And we'll see you next week. Until next week, we want you to follow your dream. Because if you don't follow your dream, you'll never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.